Get out! They kicked poor wife out. But 10 years later, she returned and made them kneel. Hello family, welcome back. Please do well to subscribe, and let's know where you are watching the story from in the comment section. The rain was coming down hard that night. Heavy drops beat against the old wooden porch of a small house in Ohio, the kind of house that had seen years of family dinners, birthday parties, and quiet Sunday mornings. But tonight, that house was filled with shouting. Inside, a storm raged louder than the one outside. "You are nothing but a burden!" Helen's voice sliced through the air. Her grey eyes flashed with anger as she stood in the center of the living room, pointing her finger at the young woman trembling before her. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She had just walked in from her long shift at the diner, still wearing her faded blue uniform, her hair damp from the rain. She set her bag down, confused and tired when she was met with fury. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice cracking. "What did I do now?" Helen didn't hesitate. "What did you do? You married my son with nothing to your name. Nothing. You have dragged this family down from the moment you walked in." Sarah turned her eyes to her husband, David, who sat on the couch, his head down, his hands clenched. He was silent, and his silence cut deeper than the insults. "David," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "Say something. Tell her that's not true. Tell her I've been here for you." But David didn't move. He didn't even look at her. Melissa, his younger sister, leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a mocking smile curling on her lips. "You've been nothing but trouble, Sarah," she said coldly. "You think working at some greasy diner makes you important? Please. My brother could have married someone better, someone with money, someone who actually matters." Sarah's hands shook. She took a step toward David, her eyes desperate. "I paid for your college classes, Melissa. Do you remember that? I worked nights to help you buy your books. I paid the electric bills when the lights were about to be cut off. I've done everything I could for this family. Everything." But her words fell like rain on cold stone. Helen stepped closer, her face twisted with disdain. "We never asked you to play the savior. And don't act like you're some kind of saint. You're a poor girl who doesn't belong here. You married up, Sarah, and you've been living off us ever since." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "That's not true. I married David because I love him. Not for money, not for status. I loved him when he had nothing. I stood by him when he couldn't find work. I stood by him when you all turned your backs on him. And this is how you repay me." Finally, David lifted his head. His face was tired, cold, unreadable. "Mum's right," he said quietly. Sarah froze. Her knees went weak. She had been waiting, hoping for him to defend her, to protect her. Instead, his words were like a knife twisting in her chest. "David, how can you say that?" she whispered. He stood slowly, avoiding her eyes. "You've done nothing for this family, nothing that really matters." Sarah's tears spilled freely now. Her heart ached so fiercely she could hardly breathe. "Nothing. After all I've sacrificed, after all the years I've given, you're my husband. I gave you everything I had." Melissa smirked and walked toward the door. She grabbed Sarah's old, worn suitcase from the corner and tossed it onto the floor with a loud thud. "If you really loved my brother, you'd leave. You don't belong here. You never did." Helen's voice rose again, harsh and final. "Get out. You've stayed in this house long enough. We don't need you and we don't want you." The storm outside grew louder, as if echoing the storm inside. Sarah's chest tightened. She turned to David one last time, her eyes begging. "Please, please don't do this. I have nowhere else to go. You're my family. You're my home." But David wouldn't meet her gaze. He walked past her, picked up the suitcase, and shoved it into her hands. "It's over, Sarah," he muttered. She staggered back, clutching the suitcase like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Her lips trembled as she spoke. "David, I begged you when you had nothing. I begged you when everyone else left. And now, you're throwing me away?" The door creaked as Melissa pulled it open. Cold rain splashed onto the floor, the wind howling through the room. Helen crossed her arms, her face firm. unshaken. "Get out," she repeated. Sarah's chest rose and fell with heavy sobs. The world blurred around her as she stepped toward the door. She looked back one last time, searching for even a flicker of regret in David's eyes. But there was nothing, just emptiness. "Please," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible over the storm. "Please don't do this to me." But no one moved. No one spoke. The suitcase felt heavier than ever as she stepped outside into the downpour. The rain soaked her hair, her clothes, her skin, but she hardly noticed. The door slammed behind her with a final deafening thud, and she stood on the porch, trembling, broken, unwanted. For a moment, she wanted to fall to her knees, to cry out, to beg again. But something inside her stopped her. A quiet voice, faint but steady, whispered, "Not tonight, not here, not to them." With shaking hands, Sarah clutched her suitcase tighter and walked down the steps into the rain. Her tears mixed with the storm as she disappeared into the night. Inside the house, Helen let out a sigh of relief. Finally, she's gone. Melissa smirked again, closing the curtains as if shutting out Sarah's existence. She'll never make it on her own. Just wait. She'll come crawling back. David sat on the couch, his hands covering his face. For a brief moment, a shadow of doubt flickered in his mind, but he pushed it down, hardened his heart, and told himself it was for the best. What none of them knew, what none of them could imagine, was that the woman they had thrown out into the storm that night would return, not broken, not defeated, but stronger than ever. And when she did, the very people who had forced her to beg at their feet would one day kneel before her. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love you to join our community by hitting the subscribe button. Through our stories, we build hope and give future to children and women abused all over the world. Motivate us by subscribing to hitting the subscribe button and turning on your notification bell. Also let us know in the comments where you are watching us from and how this story hit home for you. The rain that swallowed Sarah on the night she was thrown out did not stop with the storm. For months, it felt like the sky itself was against her. She had no car, no savings, only a battered suitcase with 2 faded dresses, her diner uniform, and a handful of photos that she had grabbed before Helen shoved her out. That first night, Sarah walked the empty streets until her legs gave out. She sat on a park bench shivering, her hair dripping with rain, clutching her suitcase against her chest like a shield. She told herself, "This is just for tonight. Tomorrow will be better." But tomorrow wasn't better. For weeks, Sarah drifted from one shelter to another, her pride stripped away piece by piece. The beds were cold, the food was little more than scraps, and the looks from strangers made her shrink inside herself. Still, she pressed on. She found small cleaning jobs, scrubbing floors in office buildings after hours, wiping windows until her fingers ached. She worked for pennies, but every coin felt like survival. At night, she would curl up on a thin mattress in the shelter and whisper to herself, "Don't give up, Sarah, you can't give up." But the pain of betrayal burned deeper than hunger. She remembered David's face that night, the way he refused to meet her eyes, the way his words had broken her in half. "You've done nothing for this family." Those words echoed in her mind like a curse. One evening, Sarah found herself back at the diner where she had once worked. The manager hesitated when she begged for shifts, but he gave her a chance. The uniform no longer fit her right. It hung loosely on her from the weight she had lost, but she wore it with dignity. She scrubbed tables, poured coffee, carried plates of greasy food with shaking hands. Customers barely looked at her, but Sarah clung to that job as if her life depended on it. And in truth, it did. The turning point came on a freezing winter night in New York City. Sarah had followed a lead on a better-paying job and traveled there with her last few dollars. But the lead vanished, leaving her stranded, exhausted, and ready to give up. She sat outside a small diner with a "Help Wanted" sign in the window, too cold and too afraid to walk inside. Her shoes were worn, her hands raw. She whispered, "They were right. I'll never make it." But then, the door opened. A woman in her 60s with warm eyes and silver hair tied in a bun stepped out. She looked at Sarah for a long moment before saying softly, "You look hungry." Sarah's lips trembled. She wanted to say no, to pretend she was fine, but her voice cracked. "Yes, I haven't eaten." The woman smiled gently. "Come in, sit. I'll get you some soup." That night, Sarah met Mrs. Parker. Mrs. Parker was the owner of that diner, and unlike Helen, she saw something in Sarah. She gave her a job washing dishes. It was grueling, but it was steady. Sarah worked with a kind of desperation, scrubbing pots until her hands bled, staying long after closing to wipe down the counters. "You've got fire in you," Mrs. Parker told her one evening. "Don't waste it." Those words lit a spark in Sarah. She started saving every dollar she could. She enrolled in night classes for accounting, often running from the diner to the classroom, still smelling of grease and coffee. She studied until her eyes blurred, determined to build a future no one could take away from her. It wasn't easy. Some nights, she cried into her pillow from sheer exhaustion. Some mornings she wanted to quit. But each time she thought of giving up, she remembered Helen's sneer, Melissa's cruel smirk, and David's cold silence. "No," she whispered to herself. "I will not stay broken. Not for them." Years passed. Slowly, the woman who had been thrown out into the rain transformed. Sarah moved from dishwasher to waitress, from waitress to assistant manager, and then to managing the books for the diner. She discovered a talent for numbers, for seeing the cracks in a business and fixing them. Mrs. Parker trusted her completely. When the diner began to grow, opening more locations across the city, Sarah was at the heart of it. She negotiated contracts, cut bad deals, and found new ways to bring in customers. Her ideas turned small profits into big ones. One night, Mrs. Parker sat across from her at a small office desk, sliding a set of papers forward. "Sarah," she said, her voice warm, "you've built this with me. I want you as my partner." Sarah's hands trembled as she signed her name. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged. But even in success, Sarah never forgot her past. At night, when the city was quiet, she would pull out the faded photos from her suitcase. Photos of her and David back when they were in love, back when she believed in forever. Her chest ached, but she didn't cry anymore. The tears had dried long ago. Instead, she whispered to herself, one day I'll go back. Not as the girl you threw away, but as the woman you can never ignore." By the 10th year, Sarah was no longer the poor wife who had begged on the porch. She was co-owner of one of the fastest-growing restaurant brands in the Midwest, with franchises in several cities and hundreds of employees who looked to her with respect. Her clothes were sharp, her voice steady, her presence commanding. People who once would have overlooked her now scrambled to shake her hand. But under the polished surface, she still carried the memory of that night. The storm, the suitcase, the words that cut her soul in two. She carried them not as wounds, but as fuel. And then, one summer morning, Sarah stood in her office, staring out at the skyline of New York City. A decade had passed. She was no longer lost, no longer desperate. It was time. She whispered the same words she had spoken to herself years ago, but this time her voice was strong. "Don't give up, Sarah, you didn't, and now, you go back." Her assistant stepped into the office holding a folder of travel plans. Sarah closed it without looking. She already knew where she was going. Back to Ohio. Back to the house where it had all begun. Back to the family who had told her she was nothing. The drive back to Ohio was quiet. Sarah sat in the back seat of a sleek black car, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but her mind was 10 years in the past. The sound of rain against the window that night, the slam of the door, David's cold words, every memory came alive as the miles rolled by. She had left this place with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. Now she returned with power, wealth, and a calm determination that sent chills even through her own veins. The town hadn't changed much. The same grocery store sat on the corner. The same rows of houses lined the street, though they looked older now, paint peeling, lawns overgrown. But when the car slowed in front of David's family home, Sarah felt her breath catch. There it was. The porch where she had begged. The door that had slammed in her face. The window where Melissa had once pulled the curtains shut as if to erase her existence. The house looked smaller than she remembered, worn down, almost tired. It was as if time itself had punished it for what had happened that night. The car stopped. The driver opened her door, but Sarah didn't step out right away. She sat still, her hand resting on her lap, her eyes locked on the house. The years of pain, the hunger, the tears, all of it rose inside her like a wave. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and finally stepped out. Her heels clicked against the driveway, the sound sharp, deliberate. She wasn't the timid woman in a diner uniform anymore. She was composed, polished, powerful. The neighbors peeked through curtains as whispers rippled across the street. The elegant car, the confident woman stepping out. It was a sight no one expected in this neighborhood. On the porch, Helen stood frozen. Her hair had turned whiter, her face lined with age, but her eyes were still hard. She squinted as if not trusting her own sight. Behind her, Melissa leaned in the doorway, her arms crossed just like that night, though her expression now was less smug and more weary. And then David appeared. His hair was thinner, his shoulders slumped, his shirt wrinkled as if he hadn't cared to iron it in weeks. He stepped onto the porch and stopped dead in his tracks. His mouth opened, but no words came. "Sarah?" His voice was hoarse, disbelieving. Sarah's lips curled into the faintest smile. Not warm, not forgiving, but sharp, controlled. "It's been a long time." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Helen was the first to find her voice, though it cracked with something she hadn't shown before. Uncertainty. "What are you doing here?" Sarah stepped closer, the power in her presence undeniable. "I came back." Melissa laughed, though it was forced, nervous. "Back? For what? You don't belong here." Sarah tilted her head, her eyes locking on Melissa until the younger woman faltered and looked away. Then Sarah turned her gaze to David. He was staring at her as if seeing a ghost, his face pale, his hands trembling at his sides. "You look different," he muttered. "I am different," Sarah replied, her voice calm and steady. "I had to be." David swallowed hard, his eyes flickering with something between regret and shame. He glanced at his mother, then back at Sarah. We thought you wouldn't survive out there." "I almost didn't," Sarah said, her tone sharper now. "But I did. I built something you could never imagine, and now I'm here." Helen's voice rose, brittle but still clinging to its old arrogance. "You think money makes you better than us? You think success erases who you are?" She turned, walking back to her car with the same measured steps she had arrived with. Every eye followed her. Every breath in that neighborhood held still. She slid into the car, and before the door closed, she looked back at the porch one last time. David stood frozen, his face pale. Melissa clutched the doorframe, her smugness gone. Helen's hands trembled as she gripped the railing, her jaw tight. Sarah didn't need to say more. The silence she left behind was louder than any words could be. The car pulled away, and whispers erupted in the street. Some said she had come back to buy the house, others said she was here for revenge. No one knew the truth, but everyone could see one thing clearly. The woman they had once thrown out had returned, and nothing about her said she was here to beg. Inside the house, Helen slammed the door shut, her voice shaking as she spoke. "She won't last. She thinks she's somebody now, but she'll fail. Just like she always did." Melissa forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow. "Yeah, she'll fail." David said nothing. He sat on the edge of the couch, his hands gripping his knees, his mind racing. The sight of Sarah, strong, confident, untouchable, gnawed at him. A decade had passed, but the weight of his choice that night pressed harder than ever. For the first time, he wondered if throwing her out hadn't been the end of Sarah, but the beginning. And deep down, He feared what she had truly come back for. The days after Sarah's return were restless for the family she had left behind. Helen paced the house, her nerves fraying with each passing hour. Melissa stayed in her room, curtains drawn, afraid to face the neighbors who whispered behind their hands. And David couldn't sleep. He lay awake night after night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the sight of Sarah standing tall and unbroken in front of the very house where he had betrayed her. They had thought she was gone forever. Yet here she was, not only alive, but stronger, richer, more powerful than they could have imagined. It didn't take long for news to spread. The small town buzzed with Sarah's name. Everyone knew she was the co-owner of a booming restaurant empire, her face featured in business magazines, her story admired as one of triumph against impossible odds. Neighbors who had once whispered that she would never survive now spoke of her as if she were royalty. And then came the blow none of them expected. One morning, a sign went up on the empty lot right next to their house. In bold letters it read, "Coming soon. Parker and Moore, flagship restaurant." Melissa gasped when she saw it. She's building right next door." Helen's face twisted with fury. "She's doing this to humiliate us. She wants to show us off like fools." David said nothing, but the pit in his stomach grew deeper. He knew Sarah well enough to understand. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about justice. Construction began almost immediately. Trucks came, workers hammered, and each day the skeleton of a sleek modern building rose higher into the sky. The sound of progress filled the street, while the house next door seemed to shrink into shadows. Neighbors stopped by, pointing, admiring, whispering about the grand opening. Some avoided Helen entirely, unwilling to face her scowls. Others shook their heads and muttered about karma, about how life had turned full circle. Inside the house, Helen raged. Melissa sulked. David sat in silence, weighed down by the memories of a woman begging in the rain and the truth that he had been the one to shut the door. Finally, one evening, when the restaurant was nearly complete, David broke. He stood up suddenly from the couch, his voice hoarse. "We have to talk to her." Melissa stared at him. "Talk to her? After everything?" "What choice do we have?" David snapped. "Look around you. Everyone in this town respects her now. They look at us like trash. We can't escape this unless—" He trailed off, his face pale. "Unless we ask her to forgive us." Helen slammed her hand on the table. "Never. I will never bow to that girl." But her voice trembled. For all her stubborn pride, she knew the truth too. Sarah held all the power now. The next evening, the three of them walked to the gleaming building next door. It was still under construction, but Sarah was there, overseeing details with her team. She wore a sharp black suit, her hair pulled back, her posture commanding. When she turned and saw them standing at the edge of the lot, she didn't look surprised. She had been expecting this. David took a hesitant step forward. His voice cracked. "Sarah, we need to talk." Her eyes rested on him, calm and unyielding. "Talk? Or beg?" The words cut him to the core. He swallowed hard. "Please, I was wrong. I listened to them and I was weak. I betrayed you, but I never stopped." His voice faltered, shame swallowing the rest of his sentence. Helen stepped forward, her chin high, though her voice was far less steady than her posture. "We made a mistake. We shouldn't have thrown you out that night. You've proved yourself. You've become someone." Melissa's bravado cracked the moment Sarah's eyes fell on her. She looked down at her shoes, mumbling, "I shouldn't have said what I said. I was cruel. I didn't think you'd ever make it." For a long moment, Sarah said nothing. She let their words hang in the air, heavy and desperate. The same porch where she had once begged had turned into this lot where they now begged her. Then Sarah's voice rang out, steady and cold. 10 years ago, I stood in front of you with nothing but love and loyalty, and you threw me away like trash. I begged for mercy, for kindness, for just a little faith. and you slammed the door in my face." Her eyes locked on David, then shifted to Helen, then to Melissa. "Now you stand before me, not because you care, not because you regret what you did, but because you fear what I've become." David's knees gave out first. He sank onto the dirt, tears streaming down his face. "Sarah, please, forgive me. I was weak. I was a coward. Please, I'm begging you." Helen's pride crumbled next. Her voice broke as she whispered, "Sarah, please, forgive me. I was blind. I was cruel. I see it now." Melissa followed, dropping to her knees, her face pale. "I was wrong. I was jealous. Please don't hate us." The three of them knelt in the dust at Sarah's feet, their voices shaking, their bodies trembling. The neighbors who had gathered to watch construction stood frozen in shock. The sight was almost unthinkable. The family who had once cast Sarah out now bowed before her. Sarah stood tall, her eyes steady, her face unreadable. She let the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Finally she spoke. Her voice was calm, but it carried the weight of every year she had suffered. "The night you threw me out, I begged, I cried, I gave you everything I had, and you turned your backs on me. You showed me no mercy, no love, no forgiveness. Tonight I will show you what you never gave me." David's eyes flickered with hope. Helen lifted her head slightly. Melissa pressed her hands together as if in prayer. But Sarah's next words froze them all. "Forgiveness is not mine to give. That belongs to God. As for me, I will never forget what you did." She turned her back on them, her heels crunching against the gravel as she walked away. The crowd parted for her, their eyes wide, their whispers rising. She stepped into her car, her driver closing the door behind her. The three who once had power over her remained kneeling in the dirt, broken, desperate, and silenced. The car pulled away, leaving them behind in the ruins of their own choices. And as Sarah looked ahead, her heart steady, she knew one truth more than ever. She had not just survived. She had triumphed. The woman who had once been thrown out had returned, not to beg, but to stand. And in the end, the ones who cast her aside had been brought to their knees.